sustainable human development. And this British economist said, I'm really sorry, but I think the UN should stop adding adjectives to the word development. And I would put them in disarray. I hired this economist because I thought that was very, very clever, and sent him around the world telling the world about sustainable human development. So I was the economist, no secretly, went to a country called Sri Lanka, which you know, to the Marga Institute, which you might have heard of, a very famous development institute, to meet a guy called Godfrey Gunatelika. And they were very happy to receive me in Colombo at their institute. And I walked in, there was a big crowd. And they said, "Oh, Michael, we're so glad you're here to tell us about sustainable human development." And I said, "Oh dear Godfrey, I was going to ask you guys the same thing." Sustainability is not a word that I'm particularly much of a fanatic of, although it came out of this the Brundtland Commission in the 70s. And basically, she and her team, with Bob Munro, and you'll hear more about him in a minute, who's a good friend of mine, defined sustainability about caring for future generations without sacrificing the needs of the present. Caring for the future generations without sacrificing the needs of the present. Now, me as an economist would say future generations will be richer, therefore you're distributing income from poorer people today to the future. And they didn't ever realize that. So Nadine came up with that, and then the Sustainable Development definition, which is this one. Development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So corporations, when the word sustainability came out, loved it. Sustainability? Yeah, we want to go on forever. Simon Zadek has a nice quote in his book, The Civil Society, which he said, of course corporations like the word sustainability, they want to go on forever, so they love that. But that wasn't the meaning of it. But if you go back to the Brundtland report, she says something later in her report. That sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all, which is amazing. So you mean corporations who are signing up to sustainability are also signing up to meet basic needs? It so happened that my first 3 books were written on basic needs. And I introduced that concept into the ILO in the 70s. And that led to human development and then the MDGs. So I feel a bit of me went into all that process. So I was pretty happy about this definition when I found it. But you know, corporations and the private sector would be best meeting basic needs by creating profits in a sustainable manner or in a socially responsible manner. Let me just go through other definitions very, very briefly. The whole issue of sustainable development, I mean the whole Brundtland report was essentially about preserving the environment, and that's where they came from. They got into the social and economic aspects of it because, in a sense, environmental degradation is a result of poverty. And therefore, in order to stop environmental degradation, you've got to start thinking about poverty eradication. And that's how they got into it, and that's why they got into basic needs. But they didn't really cover that in great detail. So sustainability kind of came from the environmental and has more or less stayed there except for a brief period. And I've got a slide here, I don't know if I've got it. Looking at you, I think it's time to have a break because I use the whole thing, corporate social responsibility. I use stakeholders, I use companies or institutions. I use ethically or in a responsible manner. Social includes economic, financial and environmental responsibility, and stakeholders exist both within a firm and outside. So I think I'll give you an after-lunch present, why I use corporate social responsibility. Point out ISO 26000 because you're going to be coming across that quite a lot. Let me just digress a little bit on this. The good news is it ain't far away from my own definition, so what you've learned up to now, just keep it in your head. ISO 26000 was done again by a committee in Geneva. ISO is actually an NGO, not a UN agency. And they created this, well, I call it a standard, but ISO said, well, it's a standard, but it's not a standard. I think very confusing what their message is, and they've got to clean their act up on it. The other thing is you have to pay for it to get into the details. So they've got to clean their act on that up as well, and I think they will eventually. But as you see, it actually doesn't actually define CSR, it defines social responsibility. So it kind of drops the word corporate, but he wants to apply the concept to all institutions. So I'm kind of happy with that in a sense. On society, and somebody mentioned, I think 2 people mentioned that. On society, I always say to them, what about internal stakeholders? It's like everything outside the company, right? Now, when I've discussed to people who worked on that, they said they didn't mean it. I said, well, there was a problem with the definition that they meant. And they say that later takes into account the expectations of stakeholders. They talk about responsibility. So, as you can see, compared to my definition, it's rather weak. And I'm not bragging. I'm kind of a bit angry that the people who worked on it, one guy, particularly Adrian Henriquez, actually works with me. And he's one of my lecturers. But he worked on this, and I haven't strangled him. He's quite a nice guy. But that's a problem with working in committees. You see, my definition, and yes, my definition. I'm not meaning it as an ego trip. It's actually to have something solid to go by, and then you can leap forward. So that's why this one. Now what I want to do, but always treating stakeholders responsibly. Now whenever you see any statements in the press about laws or what a company's done and the rest of it, you say, well, do they? When a company says, you know, we are environmentally responsible, Air Mauritius, for example, with whom I work, their mantra is for every takeoff and landing to plant a tree. And I always say to them, I'm not taking off in your aircraft, all those damn trees on the runway. They say, no, we don't mean on that. Of course not. Anyway, that's my joke. I liked it. But CSR, treating stakeholders responsibly. So when you find one company talking about planting trees, just about nothing else, right? Immediately it gives you a framework to work on. And then you can go back to my definition or others. And when you see other definitions, right? The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, it's an organization of a couple of hundred companies, big ones. If you read it, look, continuing commitment by business to behave ethically, okay, great. Contribute to economic development, okay, not sustainable development, and the quality of life, so they could have made it shorter. The quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society at large. 3 stakeholders. You see how you can look at something and really get the perspective. You know, where's the board? Where's the management? Where's the employees are there? Where's the customers? And so on. So it kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater. And I'll just show you a typical stakeholder map. Is this one? This is one done by Novartis, pharmaceutical company. It's actually done by Klaus Leisinger, who's the CEO and now heads their foundation. I was asked yesterday by a company I addressed. I gave a lecture to the board of a company yesterday, the Central Warehousing Company. Is that what it's called? CWC, yeah. And they're doing great work, I must say, and I won't say that loosely. They are doing very, very good work and thinking about, for example, one of their stakeholders are farmers, because they warehouse the output of farmers. But they're helping farmers, okay, when they collect their own crop, to store it correctly. See, one of the big problems, and if you look in the academic literature, the Journal of Development Studies continually says that the problem with smallholders is that they create produce because they can't hardly sell it, and then they can't keep it. And all that waste, I mean, I'm sure you see that in India. 100 people along the road all selling the same thing. I've never understood that. So a typical stakeholder, these are all the stakeholders. You see the internal stakeholders, the employees, shareholders, corporate management, professionals, and then external ones, pressure groups, political parties, NGOs, international organizations, and so on. So those are ones which are important. Some people use the word in accounting called material. Material, is it important to us? So a stakeholder map, and somebody mentioned that in the discussion, I think it was you, that it's different in different types of industry. Of course, the stakeholders of Google are going to be very, very different to the stakeholders of Shell. Google doesn't have to worry too much about polluting the Nigerian Delta. It just pollutes your mind instead. Not necessarily. So that gives you a typical stakeholder map, and you see kind of it's complex, and then you want to ask, how can you choose this? I'll show you a graph when we get it tomorrow, how to go about this. But also you're going to, I hope we get around to a case study where you actually start thinking about that for a specific instance. I just wanted to show you this one. Looks the same, a topical stakeholder map. And I guess I did this, and we were discussing this at lunch, about journalists and some newspapers, or many newspapers, actually not really giving you the story, not really telling you as it is. On the other hand, and I'm sure my friend who's the editor of a major newspaper would really know that, is that if you get two people looking at the same event, you'll get a different story, but the event's the same. So how does that happen? I mean, I don't know, I'm not a journalist myself, but I see that. And this massacre, I don't know if you heard about this in here. It happened in Nairobi, and it was a shopping mall. Well, I was interested in that for a number of reasons. One is I live in the winter in Nairobi. The terrorists were allegedly Al-Shabaab from Somalia, and I'm working in Somalia. And as you can see from my stomach, I actually go to the Westgate Mall to have nice food. They have very good sushi there, which I love, and good Indian food, or used to. But so when I saw this happening, it was on the news, BBC, CNN, France 24, China TV, continually. And the Ministry of Information, Interior in Kenya is a rascal. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs didn't know what they're talking about. The President was saying what was going on, and it was obvious, even in his statement, that he didn't know what he was talking about. And he said there was a dozen terrorists. We knew from the Americans that there were 4, and they escaped on the second day of this incident. So the news, and then they related it to something called a white widow, which was a woman who was related to the terrorist who blew up the tubes in Britain. She was the wife of one of them. It's called the White Widow, and very supportive of her husband, apparently. And they said she's involved in this. Well, there was no evidence whatsoever. So, but they were just trying to drag in people, women, Islamists, radicals, and so on. And so what's happened is that, in the poor barrios in Kenya, I mean, Christians are beating up Muslims, because, you're terrorists. And this comes from these sorts of things and lack of accuracy. So what I did was I did what I called a stakeholder map of this, what I called a topical stakeholder map. Actually, I started from my own understanding to see what was important. And this is what I came, and I ranked them from importance. From 1, mass media. I mean, come on. It wasn't the mass media who were killing people. It was these damn I call them savages, to be quite honest. Totally uneducated youths, no education and no future, and led by jihadists with money from some government, so I prefer not to mention the name. But so that was what was going on. I'm not making excuses for murder. I never would do that. Murder's murder. But why did I put mass media? Well, because it encouraged so many things out of it. First of all, what terrorists want is media coverage. So my conclusion was that there shouldn't be media coverage of terrorist incidents until they're over. And as a journalist, I don't know what you think. Anyway, so that's, and then I continue. But that gives you an idea. I'm not going to go in any further. But gives you an idea, and we can discuss this more if you like. And there's an article on my webpage, from page MHC-international.com, where all this is discussed, and all the fallout and all the rest of it. So it's quite a useful analytical tool to actually look at a particular incident. I've used this stakeholder map, not the same one, but to try and identify stakeholders in different entities, like in the World Cup, like in an oil incident, like deep water in the Gulf of Mexico and so on. And I found it quite I say I, because not many people are doing it. Whether other people will do it or not, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But so that's why I stick to I. I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet. I'm just saying it's an analytical tool I found quite useful. And this comes out of the kind of definition of corporate responsibility. Because what were the responsibilities here of all these people? And on the basis of that, can you...
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes.
Does this mean these people across, are these the people affected by the
Yes.
Westgate?
Yeah, these are ones that were affected by it.
So these are the stakeholders?
These are the stakeholders, yes. It says at the top a stakeholder map. And you see the arrows go both ways. I don't really like these arrows. But the thing is, the idea is to say, well, what are the responsibilities in each case?
Okay.
The government of Kenya had a very big responsibility. They sent in 3 different types of police forces. And most of the deaths were caused by the police forces killing either themselves or hostages or other people. It was a horrible, horrible mess. And this, you know, I put this up because I'd like to prevent this sort of thing in the future, not because I'm encouraging it in any way whatsoever. I'm going to stop just there before I get on to other issues, which is all based on the model that I put forward. And we have a very interesting young man who's going to speak.